Okay, welcome to the bonus week of 10 foundational meditations. So we did our 10 weeks and covered quite a lot of ground. We're going to do a practice that's, I guess, a little bit more advanced, just in terms of its difficulty in doing, but incredibly useful. I found it incredibly useful in my life. Um, And now that you have done the 10 weeks, I've tried to teach this many, many times, and I can't say that I didn't teach it well. Nobody's complained or anything, but I've never felt like it landed as well as it should, because, as I said, I found it very useful. So now that we have all the weeks under our belt, maybe I can teach it in a way that will make it a little bit more clear. So we spent a long time on mindfulness, and we're really going back into the mindfulness version of meditation, the indirect path kind of meditation. And we mainly focused on, actually, let me share this document. Let me know if this works. We were looking at this ladder, right? And we were mainly focusing on like very basic sensory experiences down here. So like the way I'm thinking of this ladder is down at the bottom here. There's a number of different arrows going here, but the main thing here is that closest as we can get to the sensory experience itself with as little story about it as possible. So we would focus on vibration, heat, you know, shape, pressure, very basic, an itch, a nausea. Like these are very basic sensory experiences that can't be broken down too much further conceptually. And we use that to get as low down the ladder as possible. But mindfulness is a practice of just being present with whatever your experience is like. So sometimes we're experiencing the world, as we know, up in the narrative reality. So we can be present with our narrative reality. We can be present with our beliefs and desires, our emotions. We can be present with all sorts of different levels that are not just our conceptual apparatus. And so one way we talk about that, I remember when I was doing this practice, and I was very much, my Shinzen Young is very much teaching this deconstruction type of practice, right? We're going to deconstruct our experience down to its most basic elements. And when you're practicing that a lot, you might start to think that that's the point, right? The point is to always deconstruct your experience. But it's not really the point. The point of deconstruction is to allow you to see some truths about your experience. But I can go to the ocean and see the beach and know the beach is made up of tiny little grains of sand, but I don't need to necessarily experience the beach in its grains of sand way, right? I can also experience the beach as a beach, right? And beach is a human concept. It's a visual experience of a kind of unified thing, right? So a beach does not have to be deconstructed for you to be mindful with it. You can be mindful. Hello, Steve. Thanks for joining.
Hey,
So you can be mindful with a experience at multiple levels. I'll just put this document up one more time since Steve just showed up. So it's useful to know that as we start to apply mindfulness to the world, right? We don't always need to take it all the way to the bottom of the ladder here and deconstruct it into its most basic sensory experiences. We do that because it's the easiest way to get into the present moment for human beings that are usually stuck way up at the top of the ladder in their narrative reality. So once you learn, hey, it's actually pretty simple. He told me, just feel the pressure on my butt on the seat. Like that's a simple instruction. You understand what to do. It takes you way down the ladder away from your story. You don't, unless you have some pain or injury in your butt, right? You don't have a lot of stories about your butt on the seat. So you get a free pass from being in your narrative reality. But as we want to live in the human world, we're going to want to operate with our beliefs and our desires and our emotions and the full complexity and a beach, right? And an ocean side, not just the grains of sand. So we're going to move up here and we're going to do this practice here called good, bad, and neutral. You can see it's a little higher up the path. And the way this ladder is, you don't have to understand this whole ladder. It's way too complicated and it's actually not. It needs to be revised in some ways, but what we're going to do is we're going to move up a level. We're going to move up and apply a little higher level concept than just our basic sensory experience, but not much higher, not much higher. So when we turn our attention to the world and we do what we've been doing, and I just had a sip of my cacao here, and it has a taste, very basic taste. And there's also a feeling of the mug. It's got a smooth feel and it's warm. And there's some light glinting off this kind of copper spoon I've got in here. These are all basic sensory experiences. But if I'm paying close attention, I'll notice that actually very quickly, upon having those sensory experiences, I start to have an experience of whether I like or don't like those things. Almost immediately upon having an experience that goes into your attention, you have an experience of whether it's positive or negative. You start going up the ladder really quickly. See, the way we get up to narrative reality is we take sensory world and then we break it up into the things we don't like and the things we like and the things that aren't important. Okay. And then we start telling ourselves a story about how we're related to the things we like, how we're related to the things we don't like, and we just ignore the things that we don't care about, right? So but that happens immediately. That begins to happen immediately. I immediately have a positive or a negative impulse towards all of my sensory experiences, or we'll call it a neutral one. Now, one way I've taught this in the past is I no longer experience neutral, really. Everything is either good or it's bad, and most of it's good. But at first, as a practice, it's actually pretty useful to have a big category for neutral, because you might not notice the very subtle positive or negative response in your body at first, and just putting it in neutral will be fine. So you'll say neutral when you notice that. So this practice is very simple. We can focus on our breath, or we can just do open awareness as we did in one of the weeks, where we just let our attention wander. And when we notice an experience has a positive flavor, we call it good. When we notice it has a negative flavor, we call it bad. When we notice an experience that doesn't seem to go in either of those categories, we can call it neutral. I use the labels plus and minus here, because I want to make sure that we're seeing this is not about a judgment. This is not about an intellectual judgment. This is about you actually observing your response to your experience. So we aren't saying the thing is actually bad or the thing is actually good or neutral. We're just noticing that, oh yeah, when that comes up, something positive happens for me. Oh yeah, something that's like I have a little aversion or I have a little attraction. However you notice it, right? And you may notice the positive or negative thing anywhere up that ladder. So there's a whole category of Buddhist philosophy, which is about, constructing exactly how you get from the bottom of the ladder to the narrative reality. And there's like a very initial plus minus, right? That's very bare bones. And then there's more elaborate ones. And judgment of good or bad is a higher level plus or minus. When I say that's a really bad thing, that's much higher level than the initial experience of yick, right? And most of us don't realize that the intellectual judgment doesn't happen without that initial yuck. And so we're practicing noticing good, bad, neutral, anywhere. We're going to keep bringing it, trying to catch it as soon as it happens. So one reason this practice might have been hard for people, because I've taught this many times in the past, here's some reasons why you might have challenge with this practice. One, you don't have access to resource, which is our first sort of practice we did. That is, you don't have a fairly easy way to have an experience of something positive or safe, comfortable, so on in your experience. If you don't, then you may find that you're just sitting there going bad, 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 bad. And I'm not saying that's never a good meditation to do, but I would not generally recommend that as your main type of meditation practice. So you want to you want to sort of control this practice a little more than you would in open awareness. So if you notice that you're constantly in the negative, either you need to go do another practice, like a resource practice, or you need to, if you have the skill to find resource, you just need to find that and add a little bit of that into your attention wandering around. So for instance, if I'm sitting in open awareness and I just keep going to this pain in my back and this worry of anxiety I have about tomorrow, and I'm like, oh, bad, 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 right? And then it's just useful to be like, oh yeah, okay, but my hand on my leg feels nice. Good. So that you can add a little balance into that experience. Now, for those of you who can, well, this is what I would say. If you can fully experience the bad experience fully with equanimity, without getting caught up in the resistance, it will on its own naturally resolve into some kind of relief. But that also requires the skill, which we've been talking about a lot the last few weeks, that skill of noticing that when you're having a negative experience, if you fully let it ride out, it will disappear. And at the moment the negative experience disappears, there is a relief or a positive experience of some sort. And so every negative experience has built inside of it its seed of a positive experience. Every negative experience has built inside it a seed of a positive experience. But that requires you to fully experience that negative experience. And again, that's a fairly advanced and kind of subtle thing to notice. And it depends how intense the negative experience is, of course. Smaller negative experiences are going to be easier to work with. That being said, when when I have been most overwhelmed or close to overwhelmed, this is the practice that's been most useful to me. Because I do have a real grounding in resource. And it allows you to start to develop an equanimity with your own negative response. Rather than trying to force yourself into a positive response to life, which some people think is what you're supposed to be doing in meditation, you get to take a step back and start to have equanimity with your own negative response. What is I'm saying? That means your negative response is not bad, right? You do not. So the negative response to the self ceases to be bad itself. Now, this is very important for us to uncover elements of resistance in our experience that are not fully conscious. And you can work with this in other ways. You can just pay attention to resistance or something. But when we start to get equanimity with our own negative responses, and by the way, with our own positive responses as well, when we start to develop equanimity with that stuff, we are also practicing letting go of resistance and clinging in a kind of deeper way, because now we're, or maybe say a more efficient way, because now we're focused in on the exact experiences in our life where resistance and clinging are going to arise. The things that we think are bad and the things that we think are good, or the things that we initially turn away from and the things that we initially are drawn towards. So if you can get good at this practice when you are not overwhelmed, it is a very powerful practice when you are overwhelmed or when you're starting to feel overwhelmed, as long as you can get some access to resource through the practice, that is, to some good, right? So it's not all bad. When you're overwhelmed, overwhelmed by its nature is my problem is bigger than I am, or I am entirely my problem. And when you're in that state, you can't find resource. This gives you a place to step and allow yourself to observe your own negative response that is generating the overwhelm. But if you separate enough to observe that negative response, you've now created space around the problem, which will, if you have space around the problem, you're no longer overwhelmed, not fully, even if just for a second. So that is one thing I would say, one reason to learn this practice. When you think of it this way, if you do this practice all day long, you're catching the story at the very first moment that it starts to get created. You're essentially catching the seeds of non-equanimity. If you do that with equanimity, then you're deepening your equanimity. Okay, so another thing that will happen in people's practice is, and most of the people on here now have been practicing for a while, some of you for quite a while, you might find a period of dryness or apathy or just discomfort, like the practice is no longer making you feel relaxed. The practice is, it feels stuck. Um, you sit down and the whole practice feels negative, right? It has it has a negative quality to it. And again, even it might just be a slightly negative quality, but it's like, I don't fully relax. This is a very good practice for that. That problem becomes then just a problem, becomes just another object to observe. And you can notice the negative. And if you are not controlling, allowing your attention to wander, you will then find some good thing over here. And now we're back in the flow of reality and we're out of the stuckness. Okay, so I have about 9 more minutes to talk. Let me just make sure that I've given the basic technique. So we would label good whenever our attention lands on something and we notice a good response. Now, that good response may arise anywhere in your experience. Don't make a judgment, but don't make an assumption, but mostly it's going to be something in your body. But at first, you might not even notice what's happening in the body. You just notice, I like it, you know? And as you get more subtly aware, you'll notice the actual ringing resonance that is happening in your body that causes that sense of it being good as opposed to bad, or bad as opposed to good. But it is not just noticing a sensation in your body. That's why we're a little higher up the ladder. We're noticing an experience of positive, of good, however that manifests. So it's a higher level concept. It means it could be any number of ways. I could just see the cacao and then I could hear my mind go, yummy, right? And I don't notice anything in my body, but that yummy sort of experience is a good experience. My mind, it's like a good mind experience of the cacao. That could be a signal to you. But we're not using our mind to figure out whether it's good or bad. We're just noticing. I landed on that. Oh, yeah, that was a positive experience. So I would give you the two alternatives for how to practice this. One is the open awareness. Ideally, you're going to use the open awareness practice. But open awareness practice is already a little bit more advanced. So if you can't focus, right? Then you pick an object of attention, and we could start with the breath. So you focus on the breath in the belly and you do the exact same thing. You just notice, am I having a good or a bad experience with respect to this experience of the breath in my belly, or the breath in the whole body, or the breath in the nose, or a candle, or anything you decide to focus on. One of the dangers of resource practice is that you think you're supposed to hold on to the good experiences only. And that is what we are doing in resource practice, but that's just a step in our practice, being able to focus on resource. So this is sort of the next evolution of resource practice. It's being able to be in contact with resource no matter what is going on. So allowing our attention to land on bad and knowing that it will soon come back to the resource. When you can actually do this with true equanimity, you can't stay in overwhelm very long. Now, I'm not saying there might not be some level of experience which will then knock you out of that equanimity, some level of intensity and negative experience. That's obviously possible. But at whatever level of intensity that you are capable of doing this practice, you are then out of overwhelm. And the more you can do this practice during your day, the more you are deconstructing your attachments before they even get going. As always, with a labeling practice like this, it's not about being right. Just guess. Like if you have an experience and your first thing is to call it good, then great. It doesn't matter if you got it wrong for some reason. If you can't tell and you call it neutral, but actually was a little bad or a little good, that's okay. It doesn't matter. You're just staying present with your experience while attuning to this area of your experience. What area are we talking about? The initial positive or negative response to our world. You can be doing this now as you listen to me. I'm talking to you and you're having an experience. Let your experience float. Where does it land? Is that experience good or bad? So I woke up with like a little bloat in my belly this morning. I noticed that right as I said that. Negative, minus, bad. Not that I'm saying intellectually that's horrible or I have any problem. No, it's just, yeah, there's a little bit of, I see Allison's face, positive. Smile, positive. Feel my own smile on my face, positive. I hear the fire over there, positive. My breath, positive. Deeper breath. That deeper breath was a response to me noticing six positives in a row, positive. Oop, a little nervousness for some reason in my lower belly, negative. Little heat and tingle at on my back, it's slight negative. Breath release, positive. That was in a positive response to experiencing the negative with equanimity. What usually happens is we get run around our life by these little experiences of negative and positive and negative, of plus and minus, of good and bad. We step into a room and immediately something's good, something's bad. And especially in the West, we don't even notice what's happening in our body that tells us that. Our mind starts to direct us immediately to avoid the bad and get towards the good. I'm thinking of someone who has social anxiety in this case. We come to a party. Before you even get to the party, you're imagining it and some negative experience that's happening in your body. But you may not even notice that that's happening in your body. You just have like mental nervousness. You walk into the room, you immediately experience something about the room as dangerous, negative. That's going to start generating a story about what might happen. That internal mental experience might be negative. Then you might imagine being at home, cuddling with yourself or your cat on the couch watching Netflix, positive. Extreme example, you turn around, you go home, right? Or like let's keep going. You met positive, you want to go home. But then immediately you picture, oh, they're gonna all think I'm an like antisocial if I leave right now. Negative. Stops you from leaving. Then like some old behaviors about how you like can like survive this come into play, whatever that is. You go stand in a corner, you go get yourself a drink. Right? You're controlled by these initial positive negative experiences. By the way, this can also just be a beautiful thing to realize. This is what my experience of this practice is mostly positive, as you noticed, because I now experience almost nothing as neutral. It immediately has at least the experience of pure being, which is positive. And but you can just look around and get attuned with your instrument, your human instrument, which is sensing the good and bad of the world. Yes, that sense of good or bad causes all our suffering through our narrative, but it's also this really cool instrument. And now I can look and be like, what is cool about this blue glass? I'm experiencing, there's an experience I have of this. And the experience is not just my mind going blue mason jar, right? There's stuff happening in here, parts that I like more than I like others. We look through this whole thing and we become much more intimately connected with our sensory experience when we allow for ourselves to notice that we also have a response in this radar here that is our body, mind, heart. So good, bad, neutral. This is a classic Buddhist meditation as the way I've described it, good, bad, neutral. I often, as I said, practice it plus minus. And so we just use a label internally every 3 to 4 seconds, 3 to 5 seconds, letting our attention wander, noticing if it's plus or minus, good or bad, or neutral. Let's try it.